Hey YouTube, it's Pastor Dwayne here. Today we've got a special guest. We are talking to Dr. Darryl Burling of Biblical Mastery Academy. So Dr. Darryl, go ahead and say hello to everybody.
Hey everybody, I'm Darryl Burling from Biblical Mastery Academy, and I've been teaching people to read and study the New Testament in the original language there since about 2017. And we have membership, which we've been running since about that date, and it's around 500-ish members, going strong. So glad to be here.
Awesome. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So you can take a look at his website here at biblicalmastery.academy. This is the main page here. You can pop your name in there and your email address, and you get some free resources, let you know what's going on at Biblical Mastery Academy. And I just want to show you something really quickly here. If you come down to About and go to Our Staff, you will notice a specific somebody in there. Let me see. It's loading up. And there it is. There's Dr. Darryl, a few other people. I don't know these individuals, but you might know this guy down here, this strange plumber guy. So that's Stephen Hackett from Biblical Studies and Reviews, good friend of mine. He kind of made this work out with Dr. Burling and I. So I'm grateful for him. So Stephen is teaching under Darryl Burling's headship there. So if you are interested in learning Biblical Greek, go there. It's a solid course. Anyway, so now we are not here to plug Biblical Mastery Academy. We are here to talk about the New World Translation. Darryl, what are your first impressions on the New World Translation?
Good question. In fact, I hadn't really taken a good look at it. I've looked at like John 1:1 and things like that, but I haven't really taken a good look at the New World Translation until I came to prepare for our time together today. And I think the best way I would describe it is that it's possibly a little more. It's not a paraphrase, but neither could you really call it a translation. It's a rendering of an English text from Greek with a very clear bias to it, a theological bias, which, I mean, you can't even really call it eisegesis. It's just making things up on the fly to support a particular position. And it's bad. It's a bad translation.
Oh yeah, definitely, and we'll get to the most egregious example toward the end there. But let's start off a little bit lightly. Okay, so there's a few things the Jehovah Witnesses are known for. One is that they are not Trinitarian. In fact, I don't believe they think that Jesus is God. They believe he's the Son of God and just merely the Son of God and nothing else. So we see that kind of slant in a lot of their translation choices. But before we get into the Trinitarian stuff, the first thing to notice is if you come over here, I've got the Jehovah Witnesses New World Translation website open. And on the very first verse, you begin to see this sort of bias toward their doctrine, right? Their dogma. And in Genesis 1, chapter 1 and 2, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Cool, right? We're good there. And then it goes, "Now the earth was formless and desolate." Okay. "And there was darkness upon the surface of the watery deep." We'll grant that. And then it goes, "And God's active force was moving about over the surface of the waters." Now, I know typically I deal with New Testament stuff, but this is just such an egregious thing. It's worth mentioning. So
Yeah.
it does God have an active force?
Yeah, the Hebrew word here, ruach, is a word that really cannot be translated as force in any meaningful way. This is consistently used to refer to, I mean, if you're going to make it, less than the Spirit of God, then you're going to translate it as something like wind. But clearly that doesn't fit in a context like this. The wind of God hovered, really? Are you going to, is that really what we're talking about here? That sounds almost rude in a sense, but
Yeah.
what we're really arguing for, I mean, I think the argument here is you have to be consistent in your translation. And if you're going to take that word ruach and you're going to translate it consistently as, an active force, you're going to end up in all sorts of mischief. But the problem is, and this is the thing with the New World Translation, is they're inconsistent in their translation
Right.
so that it suits their purposes. And
Yes.
so here you've just got them setting up this idea that God's Spirit is an active force, so to speak, and therefore trying to deny the personality of the Holy Spirit. Now, the problem with that is you've got the Spirit of God in all sorts of other contexts, Old Testament, New Testament, and you've got very personal concepts
Mhm.
like, the grieving of the Holy Spirit
That's
and
right.
so on. And you can't sort of say, well, that refers to a different spirit, as if there is a different, how many spirits of God are there now? But apart from that, you just don't, you're ending up, you have to do something with those other texts. And again, it's that inconsistency. And one thing we will see as we go through this is that you just can't fix the Bible in the way they're trying to fix it. It
Right.
always comes back to haunt them. We'll see this when we get to John 1:1 as well. The logic of their position ends up being completely contrary to really clear passages in the scripture.
So this is the only Old Testament example we're going to look at. But when I was looking at some of the New Testament examples, especially when it comes to the difference between worship and bowing and obeisance and all these things, is the New World Translation tends to live in the ambiguities. And so what I mean by that is with the word worship, we'll get into this, is it can be referenced in a sort of higher way of worship, as in something that's only given to God, but then that same word can be used in reference to lower beings. And so clearly, there is a somewhat ambiguity there, and so when it's applied to Jesus, they kind of dwell in that ambiguous part and say, okay, no, it's not worship. Even though there's many other examples. So let's move on. Another interesting thing that I'm not sure if most people realize this or not, but we had a conversation with a Jehovah Witness couple. They come to your door in pairs. They don't come to our door anymore, but they
Yeah.
don't believe in the cross. They don't believe, that Jesus was crucified, that at least in the sense of having his arms out and a cross beam. They call it a torture stake. So this gives us a few really interesting renditions of a couple verses. Now, I mean, I'm chuckling a little bit because it sounds silly the way they come out, and you'll see exactly what I mean here. So I'm going to pop open Matthew 16, 24 to 25. Reads this. So it says, then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wants to come after me, let him disown himself." Okay, and pick up his cross? No. Torture stake and
Hmm.
keep following me. Let me just read that again because it just sounds so off to the ear, so funny. If anyone wants to come after me, let him disown himself and pick up his torture stake and pick up your torture stake. And then
Yeah,
there's
makes total sense.
yeah, and what one more example, right? There's another famous passage involving the cross, and that's 1 Corinthians 1:18. Most of us probably know it off by heart, but I'm just going to show it anyway because we don't know it in the NWT off by heart. Uh, so for 1 Corinthians 1:18, right here, for the speech about the torture stake is foolishness to those who are perishing. So the speech about the torture stake. Um, so so the
So
word in
the
question, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so the idea behind this, from their point of view, is to try and reduce this from a device for death and make it just something that brings about sort of physical torment. Is that kind of what they're trying to achieve here?
Yeah, I don't know. We could speculate on a few things. Like I think part of it may have to do with trying to separate themselves from the mainstream. You guys believe in a cross. Well, we believe in a torture stake. It's just another degree of separation from the
Yeah,
mainstream. And if I understand it correct, I believe the Jehovah Witnesses think that the church needs another reformation, and they are it, and they are the true church, whereas we're all apostates. I
yeah.
believe that's the direction. So yeah, with that comes this separation of, well, it's not a cross, it's a torture stake. Okay. And
Mm.
and they'll stake a pretty good claim in that.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The problem, I mean, what's valid about that is that if you go back to like Homer's Iliad, you find the word used to of something like a beam of wood that's put into the ground as part of a building. So, the gates, for instance, would have, these big stakes put in the ground, and there'd be, into the rock sort of thing beneath to fortify these this door, if you like. And so you do have this idea of it. I mean, I wouldn't call that a stake, really, but you do find it used in that kind of way in really, really old Greek. Like this is prior to Plato. This is like Homeric Greek. During the Hellenistic period, though, it became so closely connected to the idea of crucifixion and people nailing criminals, particularly to a cross, and particularly once the Romans kicked in. This was, standard practice. However, what you do see is that as time goes on, the use of the word cross becomes less connected with the actual piece of wood and more connected with the death and the destruction. So if you look at Josephus, who wrote in the later part of the first century AD, he translates in his Antiquities the word stauros as, well, at least English writers do. So he uses the word stauros to refer to Haman's gallows from the book of Esther. So he's not referring to it there as a crucifixion device as much as just a device of death, bringing about death. And so you see this movement of this word going from just a piece of wood to being explicitly connected with death and bringing about the death of somebody. But having said that too, you also have a stauros used in the Hellenistic period where someone would be beheaded and yet they'd still be hung on a cross, right? As a way of just exhibiting the body and providing humiliation for that particular individual. So I think, again, making it a torture stake, I think it tries to draw on that really, really ancient idea and tries to prevent it coming into the Hellenistic period where it was very clearly used as an instrument of execution and a display for the sake of humiliating criminals and so on. So yeah, this is again not a particularly well nuanced translation.
And that's interesting with the shift of the definition of words. And so I can think of an example from Koine Greek into, and I say Koine, it's Kine. I say Kine, Koine, I don't know, from Kine.
Yeah, I get it
there we
wrong
go.
all the time as well. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, modern English, right? Or modern Greek. But anyway, so from Kine Greek into Byzantium Greek would be the word Pascha. And of course, you probably know this from Acts 12:4, Easter, the debate surrounding its use in King James. But anyway, the Greek term Pascha during the first century when Acts would have been written was a reference to the Passover of the Jewish people. It was, when you say Pascha, everybody knows this is the Jewish feasts, right? We're good there. But as the church began to gain influence in the world around them, the word Pascha replaced the meaning of Pascha was replaced from what was the Jewish Passover to what became known as Easter, and that's the celebratory the celebration of Jesus' resurrection. So we see that there. And then Mark Ward has done a lot of work with his false friends, which show how even in modern times from the 1600s up to today, how words have changed meanings. And he's got a list of like 50 of them. So it happens. And I think Stavros, right, cross, is an example of that. So very, very early Greek. And this is just summarizing you now, Darryl.
Yeah.
Very, very, very early. It may have meant something like a beam of wood put into the ground. Whereas by the first century, when the New Testament was being coined or written, it became synonymous with the torture device used to crucify criminals, and especially Jesus. Yeah,
it's interesting that whole idea of going back to a meaning of a word that predates the time of its usage. Or even we see the same thing with like people choosing etymological meanings. They go back to, well, this word was from two words and this one means this and this one means that. Therefore, this means such and such. Well, it's called the etymological fallacy, and it's called that for a reason, because what a word means, what a word once mean or what its root meant or something along those lines does not necessarily mean what a compound word is being used to mean in its context. So you have to look at a word in its historical context and in the context of how the author and authors similar to this author would use it. A great example in English is the word nice. D.A. Carson makes this point in his book, Exegetical Fallacies. It's a French word that means ignorant. So if I was to call you a nice person, what am I saying here? Am I calling you ignorant? Should we read into that actually Darryl meant something other than, he's a nice guy. So I don't know. But, you've got to be careful not to commit those fallacies, and it's very easy to do that. And this is one of the challenges, I think, with not knowing Greek and looking things up in a dictionary is you kind of end up making a lot of those mistakes, and you just don't know that you're
Right.
making those mistakes. There's loads of these in the New Testament as well. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of the word agathos, right? It means good,
Mm,
right? Generally speaking. But in
mhm,
modern Greek, so if you go tell somebody in modern Greek that Greece that they're agathos, CEO
mm.
agathos, right? They'd be offended because it means kind of dumb or simple, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and even things like if you just look up a word in English, a good example of this. There's a couple of examples I can think of, but one is epithumia, the word desire. If you look at the way English translations translate it, they often will translate it as lust, but
Lust.
that's actually not what the word means. The word means desire, and by translating as lust, you automatically give it an inherently negative
Right.
connotation in English, which is actually not always there in Greek. And when you get the word desire, it actually has a richer meaning. You can start to see the idea of good desires becoming corrupted desires rather than just thinking purely of, really bad desires, if you like.